Welcome to the Being Human podcast. I am your host, Dr. Greg Bottaro, and today I want to talk about the imagination, something that we don't give enough attention to, and it comes up in a lot of different ways. And I think that people have a longing for what we gain by the imagination, but don't know how to actually use it or look for it or make sense of it. Sometimes we hear people talk about the need for play and how we lose touch with something so important in our humanity when we don't play enough. And we also obviously emphasize that need for our kids to play. And if you have kids, some of the best times you can have with your kids is when you're playing together. But that kind of play often necessitates, and utilizes the imagination. So what does that look like? What are we doing? What is this imagination for? How do we make sense of it? What do we do with it? And is this part of what God gave us? Is this something we're supposed to nurture and develop? Is it just for kids? What does this look like? So that's what we're going to break open today in our podcast. My name is Dr. Greg Bottaro, and I want to welcome you to the Being Human podcast. All right, so the imagination is really important. God gave us this gift, and he made it a part of our intellect, the way that our minds work, and it's one of our faculties that I think is totally underutilized and not really well understood. So I'm going to break this open a little bit and give us three main areas of how the imagination helps us become better versions of ourselves. We can be better humans because of our imagination in three ways. And these three ways need to be nurtured. We have to use use the imagination as a tool in these three areas in order for our full capacity to come up. And that's really what we're looking to do here. So, what are the three ways? Three ways the imagination makes us better people. First of all, it connects us to God, who's outside of space and time. Second of all, it reveals our unconscious minds. And third of all, it helps us develop in areas of abstract learning and thinking. So those are the three main areas. One is very spiritual, one is a little bit more psychological, and one is more cognitive and has to do with more of human development, and also that rational nature of who God created us to be, ultimately coming back around to this fact that with our rational nature, we can abstract truth and transcend the material world around us and sort of come to encounter this world of ideas and these big things that are beyond us in this moment. So it's a little philosophical, but we'll break it all open here now. Okay, so the first thing I love to talk about when it comes to the imagination is a big part of what I teach in Catholic mindfulness. And this is when we are letting our imagination bring us to an encounter in this moment, but with something that's outside of this moment. Okay, so we have our material beings. We are in space and time. Okay, so God is outside of space and time. Angels, pure spirit, they're outside of space and time. And then as soon as we have the material world created, because it's matter, it has to be in space, and space and time go together. So the material world is in space and time. And for the most part, our senses are glued to what is in space and time. Our five senses. If we see something, we are seeing something that's happening here and now. If we feel something, and you can feel the seat that you're sitting in or the floor that you're standing on. And it's the feeling of a sensory experience that's happening here and now. So we have five senses that are communicating data to our brain about the here and now. But God wants us to be able to encounter him, even though he's beyond, even though he's outside of space and time. So he gives us the imagination, which is a sixth sense in a way. It's a way of bringing data to the brain, communicating through our mind things that are outside of space and time. Now, in Catholic mindfulness, we talk a lot about how that gets hijacked and becomes problematic because you're creating problems with your imagination that are outside of space and time. Things that happened from the past we're ruminating on, things that might happen in the future we're stressed about, ruminating on, creating stories in our minds. But that's still the imagination. It's still a gift from God. Those are ways that that gift gets hijacked. But the way that he intended it in the first place is to be able to pray, to be able to go to a place outside of space and time, and have a conversation that includes both the reality of this present moment, but then also something beyond. And we can start off with just a simple understanding of a meditation. Think about it. If you're praying the rosary and you're meditating on the mysteries of the rosary. So you're starting off the joyful mysteries, you start praying with the Annunciation, and you're letting your mind go to the place where Mary received that invitation from the angel Gabriel, and you're putting yourself there with her. What was it like for her to receive that message, that invitation? What was it like for her to be greeted as full of grace? What was it like for her to say yes? And you're putting yourself in that place. And that's where you are in your mind as you're praying the rosary, as you're holding the beads in space and time, as you're saying the words in space and time. You're letting your mind go to some place that's beyond space and time. It's from a long time ago. It's not where you're actually at in the room, but you're letting your brain encounter that reality through your imagination in your mind, thinking these thoughts and creating this meditation. That's the creative power of the imagination. God gave that to us. So it's a real encounter. This is one of the most amazing things that happens, is that through these real encounters, our brains are actually affected. So a lot of times we have wounds, where maybe we have wounds from mom, wounds from dad, wounds from, a teacher that hurt us in the past, or somebody or something happened where we're longing for something more. And we didn't get the experience that we would have liked or wanted or needed. And we're missing something because of it. So instead, what we can actually do is go back and we can almost recreate the same kind of scenario, inviting the presence of a healing resource. So maybe it's a mom issue. Maybe, mom didn't give you the validation that you needed. You can actually go through your imagination and meditation, imagining Mary as our mother, and, imagining that you bring home the report card, and instead of getting ignored because it's not a good enough grade, Mary, our mom, is looking at you and smiling, beaming with pride, and giving you so much affirmation and validation in that moment. If we go in that place in prayer, studies actually show how this works. The research makes this very clear that this is very possible. And this is what we do a lot of times with our clients. You can change your brain so that wound can actually be resolved. This is the power of the imagination. Just like, again, going back to like Catholic mindfulness, where this gets hijacked, it's like if you close your eyes and start imagining that you're, sitting on coals, or that your seat is on fire, of course you're going to start to have an anxiety response. Your imagination is that powerful. Your imagination can present something to your brain as if from a sixth sense, which is real data, real experience, a real encounter that can actually and will actually affect your brain. And if you tried that hard enough, if you did that with something negative, which is what we do to ourselves all the time, we're presenting things to our brain, not in space and time, not things that are actually happening right now, but things we imagine could happen or did happen. We are in this moment actually changing our brain and our body. Our brains and our bodies are reacting to the things presented to it through the imagination. That's how powerful this gift from God is. So let's learn this, and let's stop using it for evil. Let's stop letting it get hijacked, and instead turn it towards a really beautiful way that God created it to help us become better versions of ourselves. All right. Second is that it reveals our unconscious to us. Now, this is something I'm doing a lot more work with, and I'm going to be doing a lot more, and you'll be hearing more about this. But the work of John Paul II and his personalism, his philosophy of the human person, has tremendous value and should be shaping the world of Catholic therapy for the next 100 years. So people ask me all the time, how do I find a good Catholic program? How do I become a Catholic therapist? The one and only, I'm going to say this right now publicly, I will say this, the one fundamental paradigm that needs to be present in any Catholic therapy program worth the cost of admission is that it's centered on, focused on, and completely immersed in the personalism of John Paul II. And there's going to be lots of ways that I'm going to flesh this out. But for right now, I want to draw attention to something that he says in The Acting Person. It's a really dense book. It's really philosophical, really abstract, and his language gets really complicated. Sometimes you have to read 7 or 8 times one sentence to understand what the heck he's talking about. But that's going to be what we do here. I'm going to try to break that open. And what he says is the unconscious is a place, he calls it the subconscious, is a place where experiences are stored, memories are stored, real life events that are part of a person's history are relegated to. And he kind of shows how it's a little bit of a, he doesn't say this language, he doesn't call it a defense mechanism, but basically he says that because of wounds or whatever, we end up pushing all this stuff down. And it's really like an imperfection of the faculty of intellect. We can't remember everything that happened to us. But he says that the goal of life is to become more human. His definition of an acting person, human action, is when we are conscious of all the different factors of choices that we're making, and then we make an intentional choice out of freedom for the good of our self-determination, self-possession, self-ownership. And we have mastery over ourself with this light of awareness and consciousness. You can see why I love mindfulness so much. I mean, that's all mindfulness is breaking open awareness with consciousness. And that's everything John Paul II is teaching us and telling us to do. Now, there's this line from The Acting Person. He says, to move the things in the darkness of the unconscious, in the subconscious, to the light of consciousness, he says, is the primary task of morality and education. The primary task of morality and education is to bring these things out to the light of consciousness. So that's our job. This is what I'm trying to accomplish here. That's what we're breaking open, new ways of doing this. How can we help each individual person? And in some ways, I feel, this might be a little grandiose, but, self-important. But I see myself as carrying on the mission of John Paul II. This is my hero. This is everything that I want to do for the world in my own life, first of all, and then sharing this with my family, and then vocationally, through the work, through the Institute, through everything that providentially God has brought to my table. To help people become more themselves, which is to become more aware of themselves. And then to have freedom to make choices to move towards who we are created to be, to move towards what is more true, more good, and more beautiful. We have to clear out the blocks. In other words, we have to bring out from the unconscious, the subconscious, into the light of consciousness, all those things that we are blocking ourselves from because of our woundedness. Because thank God, He's created us with defense mechanisms where we block ourselves from seeing all of these things, because some of it's too much. If you're a child being told that you're not good, or being even implied that you're not good through being ignored, through being sort of brushed aside, through being rejected, maybe through actually being abused, that's too much for a child to handle. Thank God for the defense mechanisms that operate within our psyche that push those thoughts and feelings and realities down into the darkness of the unconscious. Praise God for the way He made us to survive. But then we grow up, we get older, we move on, we move forward, and we're going to continue this work of growth, of perfection, of conversion, of letting healing happen at the deepest level inside of us. And that's what this is all about. That's what all this is about. And so this is actually about the imagination. I'm now coming back around to it. This is the second point of the imagination, is that it can help us to bring things from the unconscious, from the subconscious, up into the light of consciousness. Now, where does this happen most actively? It happens at night in our dreams. Again, we have all these defense mechanisms, and when we're awake, we're operating with something that they call the default mode network, something that we can see as sort of our way of sort of carrying on in our day. The default mode network is like all the ways that we've learned over time to make ourselves be able to exist, be able to get through. The default mode network is how we get through the day, given all the wounds that we've experienced, all the things we've learned, and the ways that we've been hurt and the ways we've overcome being hurt. And it's almost like we can't help ourselves. When we're awake, we're putting everything into proper categories. We're understanding, we're anticipating, we're making assumptions, presumptions, whether they're right or wrong. This is the way we operate. This is our MO, our modus operandi, the normal ways that we work in our life. So when we go to sleep, a lot of that takes a break. And what ends up happening is that the unconscious, the material, the data, the inputs that went into the unconscious can come back out and get processed in the conscious mind. And a lot of that is, you can see the imagination operating in that. You can see like the way that data is processed is incredibly creative. Right? We're not glued and tied to space and time. Just like the imagination I was talking about and connecting us with God outside of space and time, it also connects us to ourself outside of space and time. And so in the ways that we, think about a person, I mean, you might have a dream and you're talking to one person and it's one person, and then all of a sudden the face morphs into another person, and it's like, is that the same conversation? Is this the same person? Where am I right now? All of a sudden, you're in a different room, and you might be underwater, but you're walking and breathing, even though you're underwater. Next thing you know, you're flying through the air, or this, all these things happen. Time and space, the rules of time and space don't matter to the imagination. And that's what's operating there. We can see those dimensions of the capacities of our mind operating in dreams. Well, we don't need to only let that default mode network and all that protection block us from the unconscious by means of our imagination when we're dreaming or sleeping. We can actively engage in psychic meaning anthropologically, like from the psyche, processes of allowing ourselves to look deep inside of ourselves and then using the imagination to understand things that are coming from the darker recesses of what is beyond the scope of light of consciousness. And it's a little too much to get into here, and I'll definitely talk more about this down the road, but there are techniques, there are ways to engage this process, exercises we can do. There are ways of thinking about what's happening inside of us using the imagination that will actually help us bring to the light of consciousness and encounter some of these things that are being held in the unconscious mind. All right, and third, there's an awesome developmental psychology and learning psychology theoretician named Vygotsky. And Vygotsky has done a lot of work on child development, on the ways that the mind works, the ways of teaching and learning. And he did a little bit of work on play and the imagination. And so he made a couple of really important points that I like to point out here as well, because ultimately, we're talking about the imagination. You can see spiritually how this makes a lot of sense. We can see psychologically how this can make a lot of sense. And now what we want to look at is, like, practically speaking, how can we nurture the development of our imagination? So the first thing we want to do is understand, like, developmentally, what is actually happening here. So there's 2 points that I want to make under this in terms of developing our abstract learning and thinking. This is part of human development, part of our learning development, learning theory. So many people, especially if you have kids or if you've studied child psychology, you know of this concept called object permanence. And that means that at some point, a baby goes from not seeing a thing and basically thinking the thing disappeared out of existence, to knowing that even though the thing is out of their vision, out of their scope of vision, it still exists. And this is why parents play peekaboo with their babies. And so it's like a developmental process that you can kind of see when if a mom covers her face and then, reemerges, there's a point in which the mom actually ceased to exist when she went behind her hands for that baby. And then the baby realizes mom is still there and is going to return. And then the anticipation of the return is really exciting for the baby. So there's this awesome developmental thing that you can see happen. Now, there's also another idea called object displacement. And this happens with play. And it's the best. It's so fun to watch kids do this. So my son Joseph is 2 years old. And he started taking pieces of bread, and now at lunchtime, he's got his little bread, and he'll eat it into a shape, and even though it's not really a shape of anything, but it's like he'll sort of chew it down, chop it down with his teeth, and get it into like a strip of bread, and then he'll start calling it a cow. And he'll say, cow, cow, moo, moo, and hold the piece of bread on his plate. And then he'll like walk it across his tray like he's walking the cow, like it's a cow. So he's turning his bread into a cow. Now think about what this requires cognitively. He knows what a cow is. He knows there's an object that he sees a cow. He can pick it out of a picture. He knows which toy is a cow. And then he knows what his bread is, but he knows that there's something between the two of them that's kind of the same. And in his mind, it's the shape. So he can take this tiny little object that he can hold in his hands and plod along on his tray with, if he chomps down his bread into the right shape. And that's the same thing he can do with the toy plastic cow. And so he's creating a bridge in his mind between one object and another, and then he's displacing the actual cow object with the bread object. So this is an important developmental process, because what we're saying is you recognize that there are things that are the same between these two objects, and there are things that are different. And he's starting to operate in this world of abstraction, abstracting the idea of cow away from an actual cow. And that is such a beautiful human capacity. That's part of our rational faculty that God created us with. So we can start to already see, but where this happens in the world of imagination and in the world of play, that's where these seeds are planted that are continuing to grow and develop and mature throughout the lifespan. And then we get into adolescence, and then we start going even more abstract, where we're not even holding the objects anymore, but then you can start learning math and starting understanding, number theory. And, I saw a funny meme. I think somebody posted a meme. Maybe my wife showed it to me. It was like another day in my life where I didn't have to use sine or cosine. You guys were wrong, like talking to the teachers. I kind of butchered that, but you get the point. It was like, math and calculus in high school, they're like, oh yeah, of course you need to know this stuff. Like, yeah, no, I've done fairly well in my life without needing to know sine and cosine. But why do we need calculus? Why do we need all this stuff? Because we're nurturing that capacity of our minds to abstract and to think with the fullest capacity of this rational nature. And so this is all part of the same developmental process. And then as we continue to grow, spiritually developing, then that brings us to a new place. And this is where we abstract from mom and dad as parents, as co-creators, to God as our actual creator. And we start to understand spiritual concepts that are beyond space and time, because we can abstract, we can take things out of this world, and then we can apply them to principles that are also in our awareness but not tied to this world materially. And then we can start to get a deeper sense of our own self, our own path, our own trajectory. So this is how we come back full circle. And so even though we're talking about developmental learning theory, this is part of how we become the sons and daughters of God and actually grow in our spiritual union and relationship with Him. So this is why we need to nurture our imagination. Nurture playtime. If you haven't played with your kids and turned a piece of bread into a cow, then I tell you, I would encourage you, challenge you to go ahead and give it a shot. See what kind of face you can cut out of your piece of bread by biting 2 holes in it and making a face mask. Letting your playtime with your kids be imaginative, role playing, even with older kids, being able to sort of create scenarios and role play certain things and just entering in to that place where, yeah, I know we're just, under a sheet right now in this fort that we made in the living room, but we're actually in a cave deep in the jungle, exploring, looking for treasure. Like that, that's the kind of stuff that it's not silly. It's what we're made for. And so let us return to that place that God wants us to return to. Let us be more like children, the way that He told us is the path to heaven. This is part of it. We can play, we can use our imagination, and we can learn how to actually connect with Him in a very serious and very deep spiritual level. All right, I hope this has blessed you. I'm praying for you. Please pray for me, and I will talk to you soon. God bless you. Thanks for listening to the Being Human podcast. If you want more free content and information about what we do at the Catholic Psych Institute, head on over to CatholicPsych.com. God bless you.